The great African-American economist and professor Walter E. Williams, who used to substitute on Rush Limbaugh's radio program, just wrote a column decrying racism on college campuses. What's so unique about that? This is from a different perspective. The racism of progressive leftists who engage in race baiting, scapegoating, and outright discrimination, all in the name of social justice. Preach on, Brother Williams, who is himself an African-American. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start with a new article from African-American economist Walter E. Williams that calls out college campuses for race baiting and discrimination. This is where Mike is going to, I'm telling the producer, to insert that great picture of The Rock just looking up and applauding, right? He's a professor in a school in Virginia, University of Virginia. He's a world-class economist. He is a cultural critic. He is an interesting fella, and boy, this article really says, look, he says everything we've been saying on this show for 2 years, but he has apparently the street cred, right? He is a tenured professor and an economist. I'm a tenured professor, but not an economist, but he has that one thing going for him that gives him immediate authority in our race-based culture, which is the fact that he's an African-American. We said it, 4 times now? And I love this because Dr. Williams completely calls out the left. I've made this point many times. I'm going to look at the camera. I'm going to say this directly. The most racist people I have ever been around in my life are university professors. Not all of them, but huge majorities of them. They scapegoat. If you're white, you're guilty. They scapegoat based on race. They are bigoted. They make bigoted stereotypes and generalizations about whites and white culture. And they do all sorts of things that if you did them to any other race, you would not be allowed to stay there. Again, the source of if we're being honest in defining racism as what it is, targeting somebody for their race, blaming their race for who they are, what they have, scapegoating them on the basis of skin color. That's exactly what professors in universities do every single day. They force this crap on your students, your kids, and then they turn around and they invent microaggressions. So while they're doing full-on racism about you, your family, the countries of your origin, your wealth, your so-called privilege, while they're doing this shamelessly, they're actually having to invent teeny tiny microaggressions because there aren't any serious racism directed at non-whites in college campuses. That's how screwed up the system is. And thank you, Walter Williams, for saying it all in a nice, succinct column.
All right, well, the succinct column, he specifically pointed out what is happening at Yale University. He says Eric Dreeben, an assistant attorney general in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, recently wrote that Yale University grants substantial and often determinative preferences based on race. The 4-page letter said Yale's race discrimination imposes undue and unlawful penalties on racially disfavored applicants, including, in particular, Asian American and white applicants. Yep. And then he went on to say that Yale University is by no means alone in the practice of institutional racism. Last year, Asian students brought a discrimination lawsuit against Harvard University. Wow, we're talking about those Ivy Leagues today. And lost. The judge held that the plaintiffs could not prove that the lower personal ratings assigned to Asian applicants are the result of animus or ill-motivated racial hostility toward Asian Americans by Harvard admissions officials. So this is what happens, and Walter E. Williams, good job for pointing it out.
That's The Rock giving him a great big shout out. But this is the thing, I said in my opening that you couldn't get away with this if you were doing it to other races, mea culpa, because you can do it to Asians when it comes to admissions. I mean, it is staggering. The degree to which they punish Asians and significant number of white kids for actually being successful students is staggering. It really is overwhelming. We have some numbers on those, Katie?
Here we go. Bloom said that their filing contains statistical evidence that shows that an Asian American male applicant from North Carolina, okay? Asian American male applicant, North Carolina, with a 25% chance of getting into UNC would see his acceptance probability increase to about 67% if he were Latino and to more than 90% if he were African American.
That's what I mean about staggering, and those were the statistics I was calling for. I knew we had them in the story, but with regards to North Carolina, not necessarily to Harvard and Yale. And let's think about that for a second. If some of these kids that have excellent academic pedigrees, they got a 1 in 4 chance of getting into North Carolina. But if you just change the race to Hispanic, it's almost 70%. And a African American kid with a 25% chance of getting in jumps to 90%. And what is the explanation for this except one thing we've warned you about many times, inclusion, right? The word diversity has been destroyed. If you're a little late to the game here, you could say to yourself, well, Asian kids bring diversity. Not enough, right? There are more successful Asian students and fewer successful black students. And ignore the fact that their demographics are fairly similar, that there's a lot of immigrant minorities on both sides, that both sides, according to the left, have felt the sting of racism and discrimination. Forget all that. The fact is that Asians aren't diverse enough because there's too many of them. And simply because blacks don't perform as well, we've got to artificially send them to college. 90% chance of getting in. This is racism. I mean, there's no other way. You can call it affirmative racism. You can pretend that this is racism that is actually part of your scheme for inclusion, but it means death when it comes to education.
Well, and I think Williams brings up a good point about, well, okay, why is it that they don't want the Asian American applicants? He's saying they tend to party less.
That's
than
right.
the other students.
They're less socially,
They tend to study more, and they get the higher test scores than the white kids. So, making sure we don't have too many of them because we need those kids to party, and we need them to fail things and have to stick around for a while, maybe pay us a little bit more cash. Maybe that's part of the reason. We don't know, but I think Walter Williams is on to something.
And the sad thing is that if we actually forced them to fix this somehow, what they would do is admit more Asian kids and fewer white kids. That's how they'd fix this program here. And so the smugness of these social justice warriors, they're engaging in all of the racist tactics. He calls this what it is. This is systemic racism. This is institutional systemic racism in our universities. They are systemically racist. And let's follow the professor's own advice. What do you do with systemically racist institutions, inherently racist institutions? You burn them down. Right? That's what you do. It's staggering to me that they're willing to do is pull a few statues down on college campuses. Take the advice. Listen to me. Take the advice of the social justice warriors. If these universities are doing what they're doing, why are you sparing them from your righteous indignation, Antifa?
Now, if you've been asleep for the past year and a half, you may not know that Black Lives Matter, the organization, has been turning your kids into little Marxists in the schools. So wake up. We're about to tell you some more information. We already had known this, but as kids are heading back to school, we kind of want to remind everybody. Maybe your kids are already in school, or they're probably going back this week or next. We want to give you some examples that we've actually talked about in the past, but we're going to bring it back because this is so very important. It deserves really another look. So we're going to talk about North Carolina at Wake County School System. We've talked about this before again. So if you're thinking like this sounds familiar, it's because you already heard it. But again, we're going to teach it one more time. They put on their website that the Black Lives Matter founder, Patrice Cullors, they put a picture of her and quotes of her, and they're presenting her as being the future for them, and that they're going to use the Black Lives Matter curricula. Now, she has come out and said she is a trained Marxist, and she's so proud of that. She's trained. She's boasted about receiving training from Eric Mann, who's the former member of the Weather Underground, who was charged with attempted murder of police officers in Boston back in 1969. So if it sounds familiar, it's because
let's be clear, terrorists, yes. Marxists and terrorists were her educators.
Yes, they were a domestic terror group, the Weather Underground, if you haven't heard of them. They've done multiple terrorist bombings at the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol. You've heard of that little place. State
Bill
Department,
Ayers,
the Pentagon, Bill Ayers, there we go.
Famous former Weather Undergrounder.
Now, you probably, unless you've lived through it, you may not know it because we don't teach history, but Cullors is also a vocal anti-Israelite activist and a close ally of none other than Louis Farrakhan.
And so add to racists
all
and terrorists, to terrorists and to Marxists, add racists because of Farrakhan, right?
Yeah, so we're giving her little
profile
acquaintances. So you know who she is here. She's accused Israel of ethnic cleansing and racial brutality. She organized a Black Lives Matter event in L.A. back in May. And if you remember that, there were 5 synagogues that were vandalized with graffiti. And it read Free Palestine and F-word Israel. She's a winner. And there were also 3 Jewish schools that were graffitied. Okay, so this is who she is. So that, of course, means that Wake County needed to put her face on their website to show what they're doing to teach their kids about Black Lives Matter. And so this resource, they're calling it a civics education course. So mom and dad, basically the long and short of it is, look at what your kids are doing in school. It's, again, first week of school, second week of school. They should hopefully, at least high school and college age, have syllabi. And we want you to send those syllabi our way. So feel free to email askduke@fpeusa.org. Send us copies, scan them in, send them our way. We'll take a look at them.
Yeah, let's make them famous. That's all we can do. They're not going to stop teaching this garbage unless there's a huge hue and cry from moms and dads across the country. So send us those syllabuses if you can, please, immediately. And this is one thing we've been trying to mention for a long time now. We've lamented on this program the lack of civics education in this country for decades. We refuse to teach kids the Constitution. We refuse to teach them the civic responsibility of freedom. Our kids think we're a democracy. They don't even know what a constitutional republic is. But notice what happens now. Now that you've got an ascendancy of race-baiting bigots in charge of Black Lives Matter, in charge of universities now all of a sudden civics is making a comeback. But not the civics you and I know, the civics that makes you proud to be an American. It's anti-American. So let's call it uncivics. It's uncivics. It's the unmaking of civics. It's civics in the name of destroying civility.
And as you see on Wake County's website, if you take a look at it, they actually lay out what they call a recruiting process for students to follow. The first step is to recognize your white privilege. That's number one. Before you learn that we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. Number one,
we can't get
white privilege.
We can't get you to buy into this unless you hate yourself.
Hate yourself.
Hate
number
yourself,
one.
Number one.
2.
That's right.
Learn the do's and don'ts of being an ally.
Right. In other words, shut up and we'll tell you what is acceptable for white people to do or not to do.
There you go. Then after that, recruit more members to learn steps 1 and 2.
Peer pressure your idiot friends into buying this self-loathing nonsense.
Yes, and along with step 3, it says that racial equity, accountability must be tied to specific outcomes. Is that just things being burned down?
So more outcome-based education, right?
There you go.
It doesn't matter if you learn anything. On the way out, what that means is on the way out, you better support Black Lives Matter, or else the whole thing has been a failure.
I guess we can't all live together as one big happy family anymore because we need to have our own spaces based solely on your color of your skin.
White people just ruin everything,
They
Katie.
ruin it.
They ruin everything.
At New York University, they've opened up negotiations with students. Back in college, I was not allowed to just protest and demand things. And say, it was like, it's the adults' way or the highway, not the little children's. Although I was technically an adult there. But anyway, they're negotiating now with students to create Black resident floors on campus.
There you go.
And this is being pushed by a group called the Black Violets NYU. And they want a themed engagement floor. Themed engagement floor. Who knows what they're going to do on it. But it's going to be for Black students only. And the group has complained that the overwhelming presence of white students has made it difficult for Black students to connect.
So here's how they're going to connect. Get rid of the white kids, put all the black kids together, and there will be no connection. You could only connect to something that is connectable, right? Take 2 plugs that you plug in TV screens or something like that with the prongs, right? You cannot connect because you are trying to connect 2 things that are the same thing. There is nothing connectable about them. But if you take the male prong and the socket, guess what you can do? You can connect.
See,
so get rid of the white kids who apparently you need to, if they're so dominating college campuses that you can't connect, and then only connect with yourself.
No, okay, I was going to say and point out the fact of male and female connection, but we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, we got
in
people
2020.
in Texas watching the show. They don't like it.
We're not. No, I was going to make the actual sex, gender.
I know
comment,
you were. Yeah.
But all right.
Apparently,
Well,
we've got listeners out there that are highly sensitive, and they get intellectually chafed if you have adult conversations about this sort of stuff.
Well, anywho, the Black Violets.
The Black
Violets are also calling, because it's not just about them living together, only them. Yes,
Ma'am, I have a question.
How dare you, ma'am me? Yes.
Isn't black violets an appropriation of what violence are? Aren't black people appropriating violet?
They might be.
If they're black violets, haven't they just appropriated the culture of violets?
When you put a violet and black together, what do you get? I don't know. All right, well, the Black Violets, it's not just about, again, them living together, because, of course, there's a list of demands. They want more black professors in their politics department, and they want the creation of a black student lounge on campus as well. So they just want to be comfy everywhere.
So here's my
go.
question, and it's going to be a snarky one.
Of course it is.
What black students need on campus is more lounging.
That's going to their own area.
Yeah, that's going to equalify everything really quickly. Hey,
yes.
Let's find all the slack-ass loser white kids and find out a way to fix their bad performance. Let's build them a lounge.
Ooh, well,
could have an arcade in there.
In New York, they probably just go to a Starbucks. Let's be honest. That's where
make them a coffee shop and an arcade.
Of course, an arcade.
That's gonna fix it.
An arcade. This isn't 1988.
Well, that's what boring white people do.
They don't have an arcade now. Everything is on their own.
Digital. Everything's digital.
Their cell phones. Okay. Well, also at Rice University back in June, they demanded that they want a non-residential black house, and we covered this. They want that to be on campus, and they also, of course, it's not just about living only with people. It's their entire life has to be just black or just white or something else. They want a statue of the university's founder removed. Their other demands included new students' requests for black roommates be met during orientation week. So you have to profile them.
Well, so you walk into your room and there's a white dude sitting there putting up his poster of Nickelback. You should be immediately able to walk right out of the room.
Okay, anybody should have to walk out of the room if they see that.
Well, and you mentioned
look at this photograph.
But you said
in
your introduction, you just said that everything has to be one race only, right?
Yeah,
that's not true. They must have only blacks around them. But what would they say about if they got their way? All blacks were completely socially isolated. They were only really interacting with each other, which led to a situation where whites only hung around with white people. What would they say about that?
Yeah, that's not accepted.
That would be racist.
That would be. Other demands include course descriptions that have tags indicating what race and ethnic groups are involved.
There you go.
Since several course titles didn't make it clear if diverse perspectives were offered in the course materials. Are you kidding me? It's time for some real education. When I Consider How My Light Is Spent is one of John Milton's most famous poems. Milton lived between 1608 and 1674, and his most famous work was Paradise Lost, the great epic poem about the fall of man and the battle in heaven between Michael and the faithful angels versus Satan and the fallen demons. Sonnet 19 was first published in Milton's 1673 poems in his autograph notebook known as the Trinity Manuscript from its location in the Wren Library of Trinity College, Cambridge. It's popularly given the title On His Blindness, but there is actually no evidence that Milton used this title.
No, he did not, but it's a great... Sonnet 19 is just unexplicit, which is what it was named, doesn't really give you a sense. And Milton, like Beethoven to come, was one of those great geniuses. Here's John Milton, arguably the greatest poet in England, certainly wrote the one great English epic, Paradise Lost, who actually went blind before he wrote it. So he had read he spoke multiple languages. He worked as a translator for all foreign conversations, all diplomatic tracts and treatises. He translated them for the Cromwellian government. Just a remarkable guy, but burnt his eyes out very, very relatively young, and started to do what most people do when they're visited with a cataclysmic handicap like that. Look, it'd be like a running back in the NFL, the great running back who suddenly has no use of his legs, right? Or in the case of Beethoven, about 150 years later, who is this great musician but can no longer hear. Here you have a situation where he couldn't see. So what he did is he wrote this, among other things, he wrote this poem. And this poem is an account of how not only did he realize that God was not being cruel to him by taking his eyes as a poet, but that God had created for him an opportunity with his physical blindness to repay that with insight. deep spiritual vision that allowed him in his blindness to go ahead and write one of the great epics in human history. And take a look at the poem. He writes very autobiographically, Milton, when I consider how my light is the image of seeing in the poem, when I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days, before I'm even got through half my life, when I consider how my life is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide. It's a dark, wide world, right? Even if you have eyes, it's a world of sin and evil. When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is death to hide, lodged with me useless. You gave me one thing that I could do, God, one thing, to be a poet, to write for you. And now it's useless. Though my soul is more bent than ever before to serve therewith my Maker. I am more ready to serve you with my poetic gifts than ever before, and it's taken from me. And I want to present my true account to you, lest you returning chide. I know you, God, Milton says. You give what you give, and then you still demand things. And I know that if I don't find a way to write in my blindness, you will say to me, doth God exact day labor, light denied? I chided him, right? I turn to God and say, how do you expect me to work in the daylight when you've taken my eyes from me? That's the first part of the poem, Milton's complaint. But now you get a response. And the response is from patience, the virtue of patience, that Christian cardinal virtue. Patience, but patience, to prevent my grumbling, soon replied, and this is an absolutely devastating statement. Patience says to Milton, God does not need either man's work or his own gifts. God does not need the work of man. God does not need the love or the sacrifice or the creation of man to glorify himself. Nor should you forget, Patience says, that every poetic gift he gave you was his gift given to you. God does not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. Whatever God has given you, whether it's a lot or a little, if you take patiently what God has given you, then you are serving him. God's state is kingly. Thousands of angels at his bidding speed and post over land and ocean without rest. Do you not know, Patience says to Milton, they also serve who only stand and wait. If the only thing God allowed you to do, if he's taken everything from you, then stand and wait. Stand and wait until he saves you. And that shaming of Milton made him realize that he still had his heart, he still had his soul, he still had a mind full of allusions to biblical and classical literature. He called a bunch of his children together and his daughters and made them secretaries. And in his blindness, he dictated Paradise Lost off the top of his head to them.
He did. All right, as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have any questions for us, visit freedomproject.com/askduke and ask away. Now we're going to wrap things up with the fun fact of the day. If you think that right now in 2020 we're living in pandemonium, give John Milton some credit because he coined the term in Paradise Lost when he named the capital of hell Pandemonium.
Pan, the Greek word for all, and daemon, or demon, all demons. Hell literally is the place of all demons. The word pandemonium, when you use it, means all hell literally has broken out, with apology to those who get bothered by words like hell. And that's our show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, lighten up, my friends.